Hi everyone, and welcome on this first video of this very exciting tutorial we're making together. I remind you, if you didn't watch the introduction, that this tutorial is divided into 3 parts, and in this first video we're going to recreate a 3D environment using the software called Boujou. I will show you again the final render that we're going to get, so that we're going to understand better what we're going to do in this first video. So here is the final render with sound.
Cher petit Vanny,
je dois vous dire que tout ça fait un peu bricole. Ce qui nous intéresse, ce n'est pas l'esthétique, mais la science créatrice et la connaissance technologique. Est-ce que vous savez ce que c'est?
So here you've got the better idea to understand what we are doing. We've got this 3D environment, and by 3D environment I mean that we've got this background wall and this floor plane on the foreground with elements appearing on the wall. And at the beginning of the shot you can even see that the shelter or the tree or even the road sign hide the background. The text which is on the background is hidden by the road sign, by the tree, or even the shelter. That will be the third video. In this first video we just want to modelize this 3D environment, this real footage environment. We're going to use Boujou to modelize the wall and the floor. We're going to export that in After Effects, and we want that to be done properly. So the first thing you have to do is to launch Boujou. Once you're in Boujou, the first thing you want to do is to import your sequence, and as I told you, you can download the file I'm using here, so that then you're going to be able to do the exact same thing that I'm doing here. So I just take the same sequence. It's a JPEG sequence actually, and when you open it in Boujou you just have to import your sequence and then select the first frame, the 0, just click open. So when you've clicked open, Boujou opens a new window. You can rename your sequence if you want. Here we're going to keep that name, sequence 1. You can see that here the move type is a free move. It means that our camera move, and we've got a static scenes behind. It's a not interlace file, so don't change anything here, but be careful about the frame rate. Here we're going to work at 30 frames per second, so change the frame rate or adapt it to your own footage if you use your own footage, and if you use a file that you can download via the link I gave you, just change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. We're going to work from the frame 0 to the frame 737, so that's just OK, and then you just have to hit OK. Boujou has imported the file on the timeline, and you can move through the shot by clicking on the timeline with your mouse, left clicking, and the green points that you can see here just mean that Boujou is loading the file on your RAM preview, and it's just great, so don't do anything about that. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to use the track features, which is on the left menu here, the button. You just have to click on that, and we're going to tell some things to Boujou. You just have to click on Advanced, and here you can see that Boujou displays a preview thumbnail of our shot, and it displays also some red points, and you can see there that we've got this sensitivity bar. It means that if we increase the value of this bar, Boujou is going to calculate more points. So here we're going to move that sensitivity bar not to the last one but the one before. We're going to work in the red, green and blue channel, normal scale, and just hit start. Now Boujou is going to start a calculation process, and as you can see it displays red crosses around the picture of the shot, and when the picture is going to start to move forward, we're going to see yellow trace, and that means that the tracking will be perfect, and in our case that's just what we want. This process is a bit longer, so I'm just going to switch off the recording, but just don't worry, I won't click anywhere and do anything without telling you. So just to you at 100% of process. Okay, so now Boujou has finished to process the calculation of the track features, and the next thing we want to do right now is to use the camera solve tool. On the left menu you can see that there is a button, just click on that, and the camera solve means that once tracked features have been used to define world fixed points in the scene, the information can be used to track the location of the camera for every frame. And I'm not inventing anything, I'm just reading what's written here. If you already had a camera solve done before, you could delete this one, but here we don't have to change that. We're going to work on all frames. We don't have to change anything about any radial distortion because we didn't have any wide angle or anything during the footage, and so just hit start, and then Boujou is being to begin the calculation of the camera. Is going to represent our camera into a 3D space, and that process is a bit long, so I'm going to switch the record off and going back at 100%, and don't worry, I won't do anything during this time lapse. Okay, so now Boujou have finished the process of calculation, and if we go through the timeline, you can see that he has created all these blue and yellow points, and these points are perfectly tracked on the elements of our environment. And now we can go to the 3D view. There is a button here on the top of your window. Just click that button and now you are in the 3D view. To be able to navigate in this view, you have to hit Shift and then move your mouse to be able to rotate around the center of the grid. And if you want to zoom in or zoom out, you hit Shift also and right click and then move your mouse up and down, and so in that way you're going to be able to navigate in this window. So here you can see that Boujou has perfectly recreated the 3D environment. We can see here that we've got the trees that are modelized in the 2D view. We can see them in the 3D view, and we've got even the background or the floor, and that's great. Now we can see that we've got a problem. The floor actually is down this line. It means that it just doesn't fit the 3D grid, and we have to adjust that using the scene geometry function, and that's what we're going to do now. Alright, and to use the scene geometry function, we're going to go back in the 2D view, and in the 2D view we're going to go on the left menu and hit on the scene geometry button with our mouse. And here you can see that it opens a window. This window doesn't disable the fact that you can go through the timeline. And here we're going to tell Boujou that we need some references, and so that it can maybe replace the environment that is created on the right place on the 3D grid, as I told you before. Here you just have to add some informations. You're going to hit on add coordinate from int here, and the first thing we want to tell Boujou to add is the origin. We're going to, so it's okay because it's by default the function that appears. Just select that, and you're going to select a point on your on one of your frames, actually anyone, to define the origin point, which would be the center of the 3D grid. And I remember that this point here on the bottom left of this white door is a great one. So once you've selected a point just by left clicking on it, you have to then click on Connect to Selected, and don't forget to click on Update Coordinate Frame. We're going to add some other information to Boujou so that he can create a good 3D space. We're going to add him an X-axis, and to do that we're going to keep the origin point. Actually could maybe select another one, but this one actually is a good one for creating an X-axis. The first thing you want to do is maybe to uncheck everything by clicking somewhere where there is nothing, and then click Add Coordinate Frame from Int again, and then select in the Type menu an X-axis. And then you can see here that Boujou tells us that we need at least 2 tracks or predictions. It means that we need 2 points, and as I told you, we're going to take this one by left clicking on it, and we're going to select another one which is somewhere else in the picture on the same level, and I can see that maybe this one here is a good one to create an X-axis. I didn't tell you that if you want to move through the timeline while still on your picture with your mouse, you can hit Shift and then move your mouse right or left, and you go through the timeline that way. We've got our 2 points selected, so, and our X-axis is defined here, so we can click on Connect to Selected and then Update Coordinate Frame. We are now going to give Boujou a Y-axis, so click anywhere so that you can check the points you had selected. We're going to uncheck everything here also by clicking somewhere where there is nothing. Just click again on Add Coordinate from Int. We're going to define the type as a Y-axis, and we're going to select 2 points to define our Y-axis, and it's just great here because we've got a bunch of points that represent that one. We're going to select this 2 points again, the origin one, and this one, which is just at the perfect Y-axis. Actually, you could take any point to define your Y-axis, but these 2 points are okay. Now that you have selected them by selecting one, then hitting Shift and then selecting another one, you can click on Connect to Selected, Update Coordinate Frame. We're now going to define the Z-axis, which is really important so that Boujou can recreate the depth of field that we want, so that we need to select 2 points in the depth. So we're going to click anywhere, Add Coordinate from Int, select the type as a Z-axis, and here you have to select 2 points that represent the Z-axis, and this shot is useful because you see that we've got these white lines, and I can select this point, go back, and I see that at the background over there is a nice point to represent my Z-axis, so it's great. I'm going to select these 2 points. I left click on one, then I left click on 1 point, and then I hit Control, and then I can select my 2 points. I don't hit Shift actually, I select one, hit Control, and you select the second one. The Z-axis is defined here in the Scene Geometry window, so we just have to Connect to Selected and Update Coordinate Frame. Now the 3D environment should be represented just fine in the 3D view, but we would like to add something else. We're going to add Z-explain, so just click anywhere, uncheck everything, add coordinate from int again, define the type as a Z-explain. If your 2 points that you define for your Z-axis are still selected, just don't unselect them, and we're going to go further in the shot so that we're going to select a point on the ground, which will be in the middle of our 2 points that we've selected before, and that will represent the floor plane that we need. And that's a great way to tell Boujou where is the ground. So this ZX plane is important. Once you've selected your 3 required points, you just have to click on Connect to Selected, then Update Coordinate Frame. Now we should have a 3D environment that is perfectly represented in our 3D grid. You can go then on the 3D view by going back on this button on the top window. And here you can see that the scene is perfectly represented on the 3D grid that we had before. We don't even have the problem we had when the floor was down this line. Now the environment is perfectly represented into a 3D space, and that's great. So now we're going to select some of these points to export them into After Effects, so that these points are going to become null objects, and we're going to work with these null objects that we're going to export from Boujou. And to flag these points we want to use in After Effects, we're going to go back in the 2D view, and we're going to go back at the beginning of the shot. And we're going to select some points, and these points, as I told you, are going to be exported as null objects into After Effects. And to do that, you just left click on a point, and you're going to select points where you want things to appear in your final render in After Effects. So obviously we would like something to appear here on the wall, so we can choose any point. Actually, it would work just as well if I choose this one or this one. It would work just fine. And actually that's what we're going to do. We're going to choose this point, which is here on the background wall. Just right click on this point and rename it. You're going to give him the name that is going to have in After Effects, so maybe you want that to be a good representation of what is this null object. Here we're going to call that point wall background 1, and just hit OK. Then you're going to right click again on the point that you've renamed and click on Flag for Export, and then this point has been flagged for exportation, and it means that we're going to be able to select just the points that we are going to flag in the exportation, and not all the points. We obviously want something else here on the floor. As you can see in the final render on the floor, we have some text that appear, and we're going to use one of the points that are here on the ground to do that. And actually you can choose anyone because they seem to have been tracked really well, but a nice way to do that is to select a point maybe on this white line so that it's tracked perfectly. Just select this point, right click on it, rename that. We're going to rename that floor foreground 1. Just hit OK. Right click on it again and flag it for exportation. Then we're going to go further in the shot. Maybe we want something to appear here on this wall, so we're going to select another point. You can select any point actually, but I recommend you to select this one, which is a nice one because the track has been perfect because of the difference of colors on the background. So this one is good. Just right click on it, rename that point, and you can rename it back wall background 2. Just hit OK. Right click on it again and flag it for exportation. We're going to add some things on the floor plane here, so we're going to select a point also. We're going to select this one, which is a nice one. I'm going to right click on him, rename that floor foreground 2. And actually you can select any points you want, and you can select any points where you want things to appear on the wall. Maybe we're going to select points here by right clicking on it, rename that, and right clicking again and flag it for exportation. And that's what we're going to do now. So just select the points where you want things to appear. Maybe when you want things to appear here on the trees, if you've got some 3D elements to include, so that you can select one of these points, right clicking, and do what you want. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm just switching off the recording and getting back when I've selected the points I'm just going to select one of these, and that's just what I'm going to do. So just don't worry, I'm going back in a second. Alright, so now that we've selected all the points that we want to export into After Effects, we can use the export camera tool, and that's what we're going to do. Don't worry, I didn't do anything when I switched off the recording. I've just selected this point and another one here, and maybe another one here on the floor. I don't remember which one exactly, but I didn't do so many things. And so now we're going to export our project into After Effects. To do that, we're going to use the export camera button in or here on the left menu, and here we're going to give it a destination. So we want that to be in a proper folder. Actually here it's already in the good place. We're going to work on the sequence 1, the one we were working on. We want to export our camera self. We're using After Effects so that it's a Maya file, because After Effects and Maya do work the same way when they use Boujou. We have a moving camera and a static scene. And don't forget to check the export flagged tracks only, so that you won't export all the points, but the points that you've renamed and then flagged for exportation. We're going to do that for the whole sequence from 1 to 738, and here we're going to modify the parameters that are by default. You're going to uncheck the use format default for stat index and null size. Just uncheck that, and here you do want the null size to be at 1.0000, and then the scale seen by at 100. And that's a way to tell Boujou that After Effects is working in that way and not in another way. And once you've done that, you just hit save, and once you've done that, you've saved a Maya file and actually a Boujou file in your computer. And now we just have to go into After Effects to get the null objects that we've created and start creating our shot, and that's what we're going to do now. So now we've launched After Effects, and the first thing we want to do is to import the file that we've created with Boujou. And to do that, you'll go in After Effects, right click here on your project window, import file. Then you're going to choose the After Effects file that you've created, and for me here it's this one. And then the second thing, so you see that After Effects has created a new composition. You can go in that composition by double clicking on it, and you see that After Effects has imported all the layers, and the points actually that we flagged for exportation from Boujou is made null objects of these points. And now we want to import our footage, and we're going to import the JPEG sequence that we've used in Boujou. And actually the better way to import directly a JPEG sequence in After Effects, it's not to use the import function. I will cancel that. It's to directly drag the folder where you have got all the pictures that compose your shot, and actually it's the folder that you've downloaded to do this tutorial if you do that with my file. And so that it creates a new JPEG sequence into After Effects. You can see here that the parameters corresponds. It means that we've got the same dimension with the same ratio aspect for both elements. We're going to drag that footage to the composition that's been created via the Maya file created in Boujou that we've imported, and now we can check if the track has worked fine. We can see here that our null object, and you have to be careful, don't care about the fact that the null objects are actually really big, because we really don't care about that. The only element that we care is that if they are tracked well on the background wall or even on the floor, just as we wanted in Boujou. And actually we can see here, if I take this one, which was the background, the null background one, this one we can see here that is tracked perfectly on the wall, and that's what we want. Then the next thing we want to do is to create a new solid. So right click here on your composition window, new solid, and we're going to make it 2000 by 1000, and we're going to rename that solid floor plane 1, and just hit OK. So you want to make that plane a 3D layer, so just hit the 3D layer function here, and so that is disappeared because it has taken its own 3D positions. And now we're going to take the position of the null object that represent our floor plane. Here it was, as if I remember, it was floor foreground 1. Okay, we're going to select that layer and hit P so that it displays the position parameters. Then you just have to hit, to select the position parameters, hit Ctrl C or go in Edit, Copy, and select your floor plane and hit Ctrl V, so that the floor plane object, the solid that we've created, has taken the same position of the floor foreground null object. Now we would like this floor plane to be in another way, so that we're going to use the rotation tool. You can hit W on your keyboard or use the rotation tool here, and we're going to make a rotation on the X-axis. So just do that this way, select the X-axis and make your solid rotate on the X-axis, and do that properly. We're going to make a few adjustments here. The first thing we want to do once we've done the rotation is to add a grid effect to our solid, so that we're going to check if it moves the way we want to. Just select your solid, and you can go there in your effects and presets parameter, type grid, select your grid effect, drag it on your solid. It will make a nice grid. So we're going to make a few adjustments here. The first thing we want to do maybe would be to decrease the border size of the grid. Maybe we make 2.5, and or maybe 3 was good. We're going to add, you can modify the corner parameters here. We're going to be able to add some lines, so that we're going to check what's happening. And actually you can rotate the flow plane that you've created by rotating on the Z-axis to make it fit with your footage. That's what we're going to do here. I hit W on the Z-axis, and I'm going to make the lines just correspond to the real environment lines. I'm going to hit X W and then make a rotation on the X-axis, so that the plane will be just fine here. And just don't mind about the optic illusion, that actually it seems that this grid is up in the air, but it's just an optic illusion. And where we're going to add some text on the floor, don't worry, it will appear just that it was on the floor, and not like this grid. This grid actually just helps us to see if the tracking was fine. So now we're going to make a small RAM preview to see what's happening. So in this RAM preview, you can see that the floor is being tracked perfectly, and by that admits that even if we have the optic illusion, the that the lines doesn't fit in the real world, it will work just perfectly, because the text that we're going to include will be here in the foreground and not in the background. And that's why we had to take 1 point here in the foreground and then 1 here in the background. It was because we had to do that. So now that we've done that for the floor plane, we're going to do the wall plane, the wall background plane, and we're going to do just the same technique. At this point, maybe you would like to hide the floor plane that you've made first, so just uncheck the view here. We're going to create a new solid, so right click here, new solid. We're going to name that solid background wall 1, and just make it 2000 by 1000. It's a nice size to make this kind of elements in the 3D space. Just hit OK. Don't forget you want that to be a 3D layer, and now it has disappeared because it has taken its own 3D position, which is not the position where we are at this particular moment. And we're going to select the null object that represents the wall here, and this null object actually was named wall background 1. Select this layer here, hit P to reveal the position parameters, then Control C or edit, copy, then select your background wall and hit Control V, so that your wall has taken the 3D position of your null object and is perfectly tracked on the environment. To make a small check, we're going to add a grid effect to that null object. You can do that the way we did before by typing grid here, or you go in effects by selecting your layer, effects, generate grid. That way you've got a real huge grid, and maybe that's not what you want. We're going to decrease the border parameters of the grid, and also we're going to be obliged to scale down our layer, because it was completely upscaled, and that's what we didn't want. But we can do that by using the scale option. Just select your layer, hit S, so it reveals the scale parameters, and then you can change the values. Once we've done that, we can do a quick RAM preview to see if the wall actually fits the environment, but I've got no doubt about that. We can make a little rotation here so that the grid will maybe appear a bit better. Just don't care about the fact that the grid seems to go in the ground here, because as in the floor plane here, the text element that we're going to make appear will be on the wall, and that the part we have to take care about is this zone here, and what's happening up there or down there, we don't care about that. We're going to make a RAM preview to see what's happening, and actually you can see that this line here is perfectly tracked on the wall, even if the depth of field optical illusion makes us feel there is a problem. Actually there is not, and that's what we're going to see right now by adding some text to these layers that we've created. And to do that, the first thing we want to do maybe would be to check that view elements here, so that it makes the floor and even the background appear, and we're going to pre-compose those layers. But before doing that, we want maybe to delete the grid effect, so it makes two solid layers which are really awful at this point. It's normal. We're going to go on our background wall, and we're going to select the layer and hit Control Shift C. Doing that, it's going to pre-compose our layer. It just means that it's going to create a composition with our layer, and it's going to take the solid and make it and move it into that composition. And you can, if you want, leave all the attributes or move all attributes into the new comp. Actually, in our case, we want to leave all attributes. We're going to rename that comp background wall 1 was just a fine name, so it okay. Now you can work in different ways. There are different schools to do that. One of the good one is to lock the final composition, the tutorial Boujou composition. Lock it by clicking here, and then go in your project window up there and just select your new background wall composition and double click on it. Then it makes it appear here, and you can drag it here on the left, so that we're going to see what happens on the final composition, and we're going to be able to work on the wall composition on the left and see what happens real time in our final composition. And it's a great way to work. I really recommend you to do that way. In our background wall composition, we can hide the solid that we've created so that you can see it reveals the background. And now we can even turn on the transparency grid so that we're going to be able to work properly, because we're going to add maybe a black text or a white text, and you can do that way. If you want to add a black text, just toggle the transparency grid on, and then you're going to add some text. We're going to see that if you want to add some text here, just go on your layer and add the text you want to use. Maybe here we're going to explore your dreams. I think it's a nice slogan. I don't know where I've heard that, but I thought it was a nice slogan. And you see there that in our final composition we've got the text that has appeared. Don't worry about that white solid on the foreground, because it's just the floor plane that we've created earlier, and we're going to make it disappear. We can then, if you want, you can move the text that you've created here, and so that it will just fit the way you want it on the wall. Maybe in our case we would like that to maybe be here. You can even change the size parameters of your text so that it feels better. We can go that way maybe. Yes. And you can add some other text to this layer. Maybe you would like to add some text here on the left. So to do that, just create another text element, and maybe you can add this name. I think this name is a cool name. You can change the police. Maybe you can add some graph fonts, whatever you want. Actually, you can do whatever you want. And in our case, we're going to choose a nice graffiti font which corresponds to something that could be written on a wall, and that's nice. And it's not finished. Now we're going to use something on the floor plane, and to do that we're just going to do the same thing that we've done. It means that we're going to go back in our final composition here. Maybe you can close the wall composition, the background wall composition. You can close maybe that one. We're going to select the floor plane composition and hit Ctrl-Shift-C to pre-compose this composition. Floor plane 1 was a good name, so we're going to keep that. Leave all attributes, hit OK. In that composition, you have to remember you locked the final comp here, so you have to go back in your project file here. You've got your floor plane that has been created. Just double click on it, it makes it here appear. You can drag it on the left, and so that you can see what you're doing. And here we're going to write some black text, so that's why I'm going to switch this solid off. And then I'm going to toggle the transparency grid so that I can see what I'm doing. And here I'm going to write some other text, maybe something like in the example I showed you. You can write whatever you want. And in this tutorial we are making this element these are these text elements, but the real artistic part of this tutorial will be in the second video, where we're going to add some design elements to all that. Here the main purpose of this video and of this example is to show you that you can actually recreate a real footage environment into a 3D space into After Effects using Boujou. And Boujou is the greatest software I've ever seen, so it's a great thing. Here you can see that the text I've added doesn't appear here in the final compositions. It just means that I have to move it to find it somewhere so that it's going to appear here in the composition. So actually you have to move the element to see what happens, and you can see that here in our final composition it's horrible. I mean, the text is obviously too big, so if you want to change that, we're going to change what's written, and you just have to go back to your final composition, and as we did for the background wall when we changed the size, the scale, we're going to rescale that element too, so that it's going to appear just well on the floor where we wanted it to appear. And as it's a 3D layer, you can see that we have the illusion that it's written on the floor. And then you can do as many color correction modifications as you want to make this element fit on the ground so that it can have a good aspect. Here maybe we could go back in the composition and change the police so that it can have a better aspect. A nice way to do that is to use this one. I remember that maybe there was another one. Yes, this one is great. You can change the color maybe to something like yellow. It's something we are used to see in the streets. Maybe some white. It would be great. And you can see that zebra is written here on the floor if I move it here in my composition. So here I can see that I don't see so much thing, so I'm going to toggle off the transparency grid, and that button, sorry, it was this one. Zebra, I can move it and maybe rescale it so that we can see the whole text on the floor. So I'm going to toggle off the police size, zebra, written there. Something nice when you do this kind of thing is maybe to increase the police of one of the letters so that you can have a nice aspect. But this is the creation part, and the only limit is your imagination then. And so we're going to include that element, maybe add some other text so that the RAM preview will going to render something cool. We're going to add another element here. I think that Explore Your Dreams is a nice slogan, don't you think? I don't know where I see that, but the guy who showed that was inspired. And we're going to maybe change the police, add something better. Oriole is a good one. And we're going to decrease the police size. Explore Your Dreams, you can see that here. And we're going to make it here. Modify maybe that way. And we're going to make a RAM preview so that you can see what's happening in the final composition, and we're going to be able to talk about the second video. So I'm going to close this part of the window, and then I'm going to make a RAM preview from there, and we can see that the elements that we've created are going to be tracked perfectly on the floor or even on the wall. So in this RAM preview you can see here that the text on the floor is perfectly tracked on the floor, and even what's written on the wall is perfectly tracked. But there is one great problem. As you can see in our final render, the road sign or even the tree or even the shelter, they hide the background, and it makes a great 3D illusion. And that's what will be the second video, because here we've created this 3D environment, and then we're going to do some math tracking to use alpha inverted maps compositions in our project, so that the tree or even the road sign or even the shelter here in the front will hide the text that we've written, and it will give us a great illusions of 3D perspective. And that will be the second video. Now we've ended this first tutorial. You can see that this 3D environment perfectly works, and if we want to add some other text on the other layers that we've created, we just have to do that the same way we've done it for this one or this one. Just select the null object that you want, create a solid, copy the position, and then write whatever you want on the solid you've created. So this first video is finished. Now you can go on the second video, and in this video you are going to use Mocha. It's with Mocha that we're going to create alpha inverted matte composition that are going to actually be shapes. We're going to export shapes from Mocha. We're going to export a shape of this road sign, of this tree, of this shelter, and actually even of each tree that appear here and that hide our text, and also this one, and then we're going to do great things to make maybe things appear a bit better, and that's going to be the second video. So I really recommend you to go on the second video to complete this tutorial so that you can do that properly. Great, I hope you enjoyed this first one, and see you on the second video, and really I hope that you enjoyed what Zebra did for you. Thank you and bye.